Hey, welcome back to Train Signal. You're watching Make Your Life Easier with Computer Policies and Preferences. In this one, we've got some cool stuff. We're going to be locking down the machines more so at the computer level. We're going to be turning off some things that are really annoying to me. And also, I'm going to show you how to do that whole mapping drives thing. Remember, a map drive is just a shortcut to a shared folder in essence. I'm going to show you how to use the group preferences to put those mapped drives in every user's computer. It's a piece of cake. You're going to love this stuff. So we're going to be looking at two things in this video: the computer side of group policy, because we've already done the user side, and then also this new stuff called group policy preferences, and we're going to be taking a look at how to map network drives with them. And by the way, I'll kind of take you on a little mini tour of some of the other stuff that it can do too, even though we won't implement it. I want to show you how cool this thing really is. So let's go ahead and get started. By the way, here's the deal. Hank is very seriously considering implementing this whole hoteling concept that we've kind of seen prop up here and there. Basically, the users won't have regular machines. Instead, he wants his sales reps to be out in the field doing what he calls house calls, where our sales representatives are actually sitting at people's kitchen tables, on the couch and such, and talking with them about investing and securities and stocks and all this other kind of stuff. So that presents us as the IT department with a kind of unique challenge. We really need to ensure that we have a standard desktop policy all the way across all of our machines, no matter who's at that particular machine. So we're going to be looking at this group policy computer settings side rather than the user side, even though the user side does do quite a good job at locking a lot of stuff down. But we want to make sure we have some things that are uniform across the board when users sit down at those particular machines. Now, just a quick note, we're going to take a couple of exceptions from this. We're going to be taking your machine, the CL1 machine, Jamie's machine, which is CL2, and CL3, which is going to be Hank's machine, and we're not going to be applying those policies. After the last run-in with Hank, with him being mad because he couldn't put his horse on his desktop, well, we want to exempt Hank from any kind of locking down in his policies. So what we're going to be doing isn't that different than what we did with the user policy. Okay, we're going to be locking down those machines themselves, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to be breaking out our computer accounts. And by the way, we have computer accounts since, remember, Jamie installed all the machines and joined it to the domain. We're going to be taking most of our machines and putting them into standard computers. And then we're going to be creating a GPO, a new GPO, called Computer Lockdown. And we're going to link it to that standard computer's OU. Now, we're also going to be breaking out another OU called Privileged Computers. Now, this one is where your machine, Jamie's machine, and Hank's machine are going to live. This is not going to have any GPO linked to it, though, initially. So we're going to be taking basically client 4 through client 25. We're going to be putting them into the standard computer's OU. And then client 1 through client 3, we're going to be putting those three into privileged computers that will have no GPO linked and essentially no lockdown policies. Now, just so you know, for the time being, we should probably leave CL2 out. That's Jamie's machine, because we're using it to test all of our group policy settings. And if we throw it into privileged computers, we won't be able to actually test out to see if our policies are actually working. So we'll go ahead and we'll leave it in standard computers for the time being, but then we'll move it back over to privileged computers later on after we're done with our testing, okay? All right, so before we jump headlong into it, let's just hit another blinding flash of the obvious. Now, we've been talking about the user side of group policy, and we created that desktop lockdown policy. Now, that's going to follow our users wherever they may log into. So no matter what machine Lance Binga, L Binga, is actually logging into, well, desktop lockdown is going to apply. But on the opposite side, for our group policy object that we're about to create, computer lockdown, we're going to be using the computer side of group policy. And computer policies, basically, those stay with the computer no matter who logs into it. So no matter who it is, L. Binga, H. Richardson, J. Owens, or, J. Owens? Well, no matter who logs into it, computer lockdown is going to apply to that machine. So this is a point where we kind of start to look at a little bit of philosophy, and it's our philosophies are going to vary a little bit here. Some guys are going to say, hey, you know what, desktop are for user side. Let's be more restrictive on the user side and then less restrictive on the computer side of policy. Some folks are going to say, hey, you know what, let's be more restrictive on the computer side and let's be less restrictive on the user side. Is there a right way or wrong way to do it? And which side should you go for? And it's going to depend upon what you as an administrator decide, what your CIO and everyone, all the other management team members decide, because there's a time and place for both. Okay? So whether you are more restrictive on the user or more restrictive on the computer side, it's all going to depend upon what you feel is going to be the most useful for you as a company. And some of those things, you might change halfway down the road too. After you start seeing how users are using the machines and what kinds of users that you have, you might be least restrictive on user side and more restrictive on the computer side. Now, my personal philosophy right now, which might change in 6 months, I have a tendency to be more restrictive on the user side no matter where they log into, and then least restrictive on the computer side. And I use the computer side of policy to be a little more utility, turning things off that annoy me, stuff like that. But again, that's something that you're going to have to decide, and something that you have to keep in mind as we look at group policy and how we start to implement it. So in this video, again, our desktop lockdown policy is going to actually be a little more restrictive than computer lockdown. Well, and that's going to be okay. All right, so let's talk about the policy settings that we're going to be creating or setting up in our new computer lockdown policy we're going to be applying to our new standard computers organizational unit. First of all, we're going to turn off that Windows sidebar. Why? Because it annoys me, and that's really the only reason. We're going to turn off that welcome screen that keeps popping up because it's really annoying too. But as we get into the group policy object, you're going to find a little bit of a twist into the mix that's going to pose kind of a challenge for us that I have a good solution for. We're going to also be turning on and enforcing user account control. Now, user account control, since all of our clients are going to be Vista clients, user account control is enabled automatically. So really what we're going to be doing with this one is really more as a safety precaution. I want you to see where those settings are at in group policy in case you do need to utilize them. Then we're going to turn on this thing called loopback processing. And this is a cool feature because it's going to ensure that whoever logs on to the machine always gets one particular policy, that particular policy that has loopback processing enabled on it applied to that user. So here is the rule. Loopback processing, whenever you enable it on a computer-based policy, loopback processing policies always win. Okay? Now, when we get to that section in the actual organizational unit structure and all in the group policy management editor, I'm going to kind of switch back over here. I want to talk with you more about that a little bit later on. But one more thing, I want to ensure that any local group policies do not run. And here's the reason for that. Local group policies might interfere with our domain and OU policies. And again, this is a precautionary measure because we're coming into clean machines, and so we don't have to really worry about local group policy. But just in case, okay, just in case there are some weird local group policy options in the mix, we want to make sure that they don't interfere with what we're setting up on domain and the OU. Now, this may or may not be a good idea for you, okay, just so you know. But again, it's one of those things I want to show you where it's at, talk with you about it, and then you can decide whether or not you want to implement this kind of thing in your own enterprise level network. Okay, so now we have kind of a roadmap about what we're going to be doing. Let's go ahead and let's move over to Client 1. And I tell you what, I think first what we need to do is we need to create a remote desktop shortcut to CL2, Client 2, our testing machine. So that way we don't have to keep bouncing back and forth to it. We can manage everything and test everything out from one centralized location. All right, well, here we are over on Client 1. And you see here that we have our shortcuts that we had created earlier on this one. And here they are down. Actually, everything is all up and running already. But you know what? Since we're going to be testing on Client 2, let's go ahead and create a shortcut for that one. However, we need to bounce over to the actual Client 2 machine and enable remote desktop. So let's do that really quick. It doesn't take very long. We're just going to bounce right on over to it. Here's Client 2. And I'm going to go ahead and log on here as the Supercoach account. And let's just get this remote desktop stuff set up on it so we have that capacity. Now, as I log in here as Supercoach, you'll notice here that the Welcome Center and the sidebar still pop up. Yeah, that's really great. Again, we're going to turn that off. Let's go into the computer properties here real quick. And let's go ahead and let's change the remote settings. Let's enable connections from computers running remote desktop with network level authentication. Now also, let's select the user accounts. I want to be able to have any of my domain users, any of my salespeople, ops people, whoever, actually be able to use this, so that way I can test them all out. So I'm going to click here on the Add button and type in here domain users. So now any domain user will be able to use the remote desktop and log into this machine remotely. So this is a good idea for testing, so that way I can test different accounts and I don't always have to log in with Supercoach, okay? Because obviously Supercoach already has access. So I'll cancel that and tell that okay. All right, so I can close this, and yep, here it is again, the welcome screen and the sidebar. Those are that's really great. All right, let's go ahead and let's log off this machine now. Because if I'm logged on and I try to remote desktop in, that causes a little bit of interference. So let's go ahead and skip that. And let's go ahead and bounce on over to client 1. And now let's set up our remote desktop shortcut. Now this is nothing new, right? We just go ahead and open up the remote desktop connection. And we're going to do cl2ny.viz. All right, let's cancel that just a second. Let's go to the options. And I'm going to go ahead and take out the username here, because what I want to do is I want to create a shortcut that's always going to prompt me for credentials. Now this is a good idea for testing, obviously. I'm going to leave the username blank. I'm going to leave allow me to save credentials unchecked. Okay. Now let's go to display. I'm going to leave that. That's going to be okay. Local resources, that's going to be okay. Programs, I don't want to start anything on the connection. Now let's take a look at the experience. Since we're on a local LAN, I'm going to switch over from modem to LAN. That way I can see the desktop background and basically make it as much as I possibly can the experience that the user is going to be looking at as if they were logged into the actual machine. Okay. In the advanced section for server authentication, just connect and don't warn me. I don't need to worry about whether I'm connecting to the wrong machine because I only have like 4 machines on my network now. All right, we'll tell this to save now. So we're going to go here to the General tab and Save As. And let's save this guy to my desktop real quick. And let's just call this CL2. That'll do it. And click on Save. And close it. And now let's try it out. Let's go ahead and log into CL2. And I'm going to go ahead and use a different account. I'm just going to log in here as Supercoach, just to make sure that I can get on A-OK. Yeah, that looks all right. Okay, so as a Supercoach account, I have the standard desktop background. Nothing new surprising here. Oh, look, there's the Welcome Center. Isn't that neat? Where's my sidebar? Is the sidebar going to work for remote desktop? Well, maybe not. We might see some alterations between sitting at the actual machine and having the remote desktop open. So I might have to go back when we're doing our testing, go back and check to see if that sidebar opens after we've tried to turn it off via group policy. But we can at least do some initial testing with this. You know what? Let's just do one more real quick. Let's try Elbinga. And let's make sure that our desktop is working A-OK. Elbinga here. Because remember, in the last one, we set up our user account policies to ensure that we had the same desktop on every one of our machines. So I just want to make sure that that's working A-OK still. Hey, there we go. All right, so we got Globomantic's wallpaper still going on here. If I go to personalize, can I change? Nope, I cannot change the background. Well, that's good news. Okay, so my group policy thus far is still working A-OK. Let's go ahead and let's log off as Elbinga. No reason to be on there. So we know that that's working a-okay. So now that our remote desktop shortcut has been created, let's go ahead and get into our group policy work now. Let's go over here to DC1, and what we need to do first is here in the Server Manager, I'm still in Active Directory Users and Computers, Globomantics, and you'll see here in NY Computers, here are all of the machines that Jamie has set up for us and joined to the domain. So this is not the most optimum because any group policy that we're going to apply, we would have to apply to NY Computers. Remember, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be splitting our machines between two new organizational units. Let's go ahead and let's make those real quick. Right-clicking on NY Computers, I'm going to go to New, and I'm going to go to OU. All right, so this organizational unit I'm going to call Standard Computers. And now let's make one called Privileged Computers. See if I can learn how to spell privileged. And there we go. All right, so here's our two new organizational units now for computers. Let's go ahead and go over here to NY Computers and let's start moving some stuff around. So we're going to take CL1. Let's put CL1 in Privileged Computers. Let's take CL3. Where'd it go here? CL3. We're going to also put it in Privileged Computers. Notice I'm just dragging and dropping. Now, under normal circumstances, it's not a good idea to start dragging and dropping random things in random places, especially since you have group policy issues oftentimes to contend with. Since we're kind of in a pre-production stage of our network and we're still building and working and testing things out, it's not going to be that big a deal. All right, NY Computers, now we need to take all the rest of our computers. So I'm going to do a shift and click and select all of the other computer accounts, and I'm going to drag them to standard. Now, I need to do something also with our two accounts here, or our two groups we had created earlier. Let's take those guys and put them into the appropriate places as well. Standard to standard and IT computers to privileged computers. All right, so standard computers has pretty much everything, including CL2. Remember, we're leaving CL2 in here for testing. Now, we'll move it later on back over to privileged computers. Don't let me forget that, okay? Privileged computers here, CL1 and CL3. These are two that our organizational unit group policy object will not be linked to, and our new group policy object will be linked here to standard computers. Okay, so now that our organizational units are set up properly, let's go ahead and let's go to our group policy stuff and let's start working on it. Now, just so you know, I can actually shrink up the roles section here and go into Features and Group Policy Management. It's hanging out here in the Server Manager as well. Of course, if you like, you can also go to Administrative Tools, remember, and Group Policy Management. Or we can do all this stuff here. It's really 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Let's go to Globomantics and let's go to our New York OU. Looks like we need to hit the F5 key. There we go, and refresh. And here's our new organizational units hanging out here. So now we need to create that new GPO. So I'm right-clicking on standard computers. I'm going to create a GPO in this domain and link it here. And so now we're going to call this, remember, Computer Lockdown. And remember, you can name your GPOs anything you want. You can name them Spot, Sally Sue, Bubba, whatever. And tell it OK. And that's going to create a new GPO. It's also going to create a new link. Remember, this is a link. Okay, when you select it, it's going to tell you you have selected a link to a group policy object. So we can make changes to this link object here by right-clicking on it. We can edit the group policy directly here. We can enforce this group policy, which remember, enforcing breaks through inheritance. Now, we don't have any inheritance to break through here, so we're not worried about that one. Although we are going to use it just a little bit later in the video when we do our whole mapped drives group policy object. Notice here that link enabled is check marked. That tells us that this object is live linked to this OU. We can disable it just so you know, just as a quick reminder. So if we need to do a little troubleshooting, we can actually disable a link that does not delete the group policy. All it does is disable the link and allows us to see what happens if that group policy is not being applied. I'm going to go ahead and make sure this link is enabled because I do want it to apply to the computers that are in standard computers. So now it's time to get in here and edit this thing. Let's right-click it, select Edit, and even though we're right-clicking and selecting Edit on the link, it's still going to actually open up the computer lockdown group policy object itself. Now remember, we're working more towards the computer configuration side of group policy in this video. So let's go into the policies section here first. We're going to be doing most of our work in administrative templates, although there's a couple of them we're going to have to jump up here to Windows settings as well, but we'll get to that one a little bit later. First, let's start with turning off that random sidebar, because you already know that it annoys me. All right? So we're going to go here to administrative templates and to all settings. Now there are 1,400 settings in this set of policies, and wow, holy cow, that's a lot of stuff. But here's a nice feature. I can actually filter out the stuff that I'm looking for. Let's go to the View menu. I'm going to go to Filter Options. I want to find the policies that have to do with the sidebar. So I'm going to put in Enable Keyword Filters here. I'm going to put in Sidebar here and just tell it OK. And that will automatically activate the filter on all settings. And here are the 4 settings that apply to the sidebar. Well, first of all, turn off Windows Sidebar. I like that one. Let's open that one up and let's enable it. Notice here that's supported on only Windows Vista. Well, there's a big surprise there because the sidebar doesn't exist on XP or 2000 or, heaven forbid, 98. So remember, we can always take a look at the explanation of that particular policy setting. I also want to encourage you to put in comments as you set these off. Basically, your comments are for other folks, and just to kind of help remind yourself about what you were thinking and tell other people what you were thinking when you turned on this or turned off this particular setting. So I'm going to put in here turn off sidebar because it annoys me. All right, there we go. And then I can put in a date. There we go. So that way I can kind of keep a running log about what's been happening with this particular group policy setting. All right, so that's enabled. That's good. I'm going to tell it OK. All right, I'm also going to disable unpacking installation of gadgets that are not digitally signed. I want to make sure that just in case someone does find a way around group policy, that they can't actually install malicious gadgets. Now, some gadgets, even though they may not be quote-unquote digitally signed and secure, they still might be problematic. All right, so we're going to go ahead and just make sure they cannot install any gadgets just in case that thing somehow does get turned back on. And also, I'm going to turn off user-installed Windows sidebar gadgets just as another quick security option. Okay, so our sidebar stuff is taken care of. I'm not going to turn on the override the more gadgets link because, well, if the sidebar is turned off to start off with, they're not going to be able to get to the more gadgets link to begin with. All right. Okay, so that at least turns it off whenever a user logs in. Okay, so the next thing on our hit parade is turning off that welcome center. So I'll tell you what, let's go back here to all settings and let's go to filter options and let's type in here welcome. Okay, so we're going to filter out all the settings that have to do with the welcome. All right, so let's take a look here. Don't display the getting started welcome screen at logon. I'm going to open this one up and let's take a look. Supported on Microsoft Windows 2000 only. Huh. Well, something tells me that that's not going to work because, well, we have all Vista clients, right? So even if I go in here to the explain, yeah, that's not going to get the job done. All right, so let's tell that OK. This is not the place where that one is. Well, that's a little problematic, but it just so happens that I do know where it is. Go figure, right? It's actually underneath here in the user configuration. Now, right now, immediately, your ears should be perking up because I told you we're going to be working on the computer configuration side, right? Yeah, we are, but this particular setting, well, it's only in the only in the user side. So let's go ahead and let's turn on the welcome center item here because that's what we want to turn off. Okay, here we go. Do not display the Welcome Center at user logon. Let me switch over to the standard tab. Don't need that extended thing going. I'm going to double click on this one. Okay, this one says at least Windows Vista. If I go to the explanation, it tells me that it's going to turn off the Welcome Center window at the user logon. Now, it doesn't prevent it from opening up. It just prevents it from opening up as soon as the user logs on. Okay, well, this is a good idea. And my comment is going to be, I like this setting. I know, brilliant, right? 61208. Okay, that's good enough. Let's go ahead and let's enable this. We do not want the Welcome Center to be on at user logon. Okay, now immediately there should be some questions in your head. First of all, computer lockdown is only applied. Let me switch over here to the server manager. Computer lockdown is only applied to standard computers. What's not in the standard computers organizational unit? The users, right? The users are in the NY users organizational unit. So initially you should be thinking, hey, that user setting is not going to make any bit of difference when people log into this machine. And right now you would be absolutely correct. However, yep, there's always a however or a but or something in there, right? Let's find another setting. I told you this one was going to be problematic, didn't I? Yeah, I did. You know, if you don't remember, rewind the video. It's in the beginning. This setting is going to be a little problematic because this can only be turned on the user side. Now, this is where we get into this thing called loopback processing. Let's go here to the computer configuration side and the all settings. Let's go to View and Filter Options. And I'm going to do a search for loopback. And let's see if we can find that rascal. Here we go. User Group Policy Loopback Processing Mode. All right, I'm going to turn this guy on here for a second. I'm going to enable this one, and let me talk with you about this for a second. Here's the cool thing about this one. User Group Policy Loopback Processing will actually allow you to replace or merge settings in this group policy object on the user side, even if the user account is not in this organizational unit. Okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn this guy on. Let's go ahead and let's have it merge. Now, there's two options, just so you know, merge and replace. What merge does is it takes all of the group policy settings on the user side and the computer side in this group policy object and adds them to or merges them with any user settings from any other group policy objects that the user might be subject to. Now replace says, okay, I'm going to ignore every other group policy object that applies to this user and replace it with this group policy object here. Okay, we're going to leave it to merge right now. And in the explanation tab, there's all kinds of stuff in here. I have a better way to illustrate this. I have a slide for this. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave in a comment here. Enabled for Welcome Center turnoff. Let's go ahead and just date this guy in here. It's always a good idea to date your comments so you know what happened and what you're thinking on that particular day. Okay, so I went ahead and I've enabled this. Let's switch back over now to the slides. I want to talk with you more about loopback processing because I want to make sure you understand this. It can be really, really super useful, especially when you're trying to create a standard user experience when users are logging into any number of machines. Like, you remember we were talking about Hank is thinking about doing this whole hoteling concept where people are going to be not have their standard desks. They're going to walk in and use any computer that's available. Well, loopback processing is a really good idea for this. So let's switch over to the slides. Let's talk about this. All right, loopback processing. Here's how it works, okay? Initially, let's say that we have Elbinga here, all right? And Elbinga is subject to the desktop lockdown policy. So the desktop lockdown policy says, hey, I have user settings, and I travel with Elbinga wherever he logs in. All right, well, that's neat. So technically, when Elbinga logs into cl3ny.viz, then Desktop lockdown user settings would then apply to him, right? Now, under normal circumstances, that's true. However, let's say that CL3 is subject to the settings from computer lockdown. Let's say that CL3 is in the organizational unit that has computer lockdown applied to it or linked to it, right? Well, computer lockdown says, oh yeah? Well, let me tell you what, I have user loopback processing. My user settings override or add to your settings, even though LBinga's account isn't even in the organizational unit that I'm linked to. So he says, woohoo, I win. Now, that kind of makes, desktop lockdown sad because, it doesn't win. But here's the thing, okay? LBinga sits down at CL3, logs in, and there's two things that could happen. Computer lockdown has loopback processing. Now, if the loopback processing says replace, then desktop lockdown user settings have no say at all in what LBinga can or can't do. Then at that point, LBinga is now subject to computer lockdown because computer lockdown replaces or merges the group policy object when he sits down and logs into client 3. Okay? So there's two things that happen, just kind of as a quick review. I want to make sure you get this. Okay? If computer lockdown has loopback processing, it does one of two things. It will either take and say, okay, all of my settings will add to desktop lockdown settings, or all of my user settings will replace desktop lockdown. So here's the rule that I want you to remember. Whoever has loopback processing wins. Okay? Group policy that has loopback processing is generally computer side group policy. Okay? Loopback processing works at the computer level of the group policy object side. All right, so I think we got that now. Let's go ahead and let's move back on over to client 1 and let's finish out the rest of our group policy work. All right, so loopback processing is enabled. So all of the computer configuration stuff here is going to be merging with anything from desktop lockdown, okay? So let's go back here to all settings. We've got a couple of other policy objects or a couple other settings that we need to work on. The next thing I want to work on is that user account control stuff. And we need to go into the Windows settings for this one. It's not under administrative templates. So here's Windows settings. We're going to go into security settings. And we're going to go to security options. Let's go ahead and scroll down here into security options. Here's all of our user account control stuff. Tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and sort this stuff up to the top. Let's hit the policy sort button up top here. Let's scroll back up and okay, here they are. All right, so there's a couple of these that I want to talk to you about. And again, this is one of those things that we're really more concerned about in terms of, just as an extra safety precaution. So even if you don't use these or turn these on, just so you know, they're going to be enabled unless you do something kind of interesting. Let's talk about that in just a second here, okay? Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this first one. Switch to the secure desktop when prompting for elevation. Now, secure desktop is one of those little Vista things that a lot of people get really annoyed by. When you do something that requires administrator credentials, you know how the screen goes kind of gray and it kind of has a transparency overlay over the top of it? That's called the secure desktop, and it's one of those safety security features that's built in. We're going to go ahead and turn that on. The next one I want to talk to you about is this detect application installation and prompt for elevation. Let's go ahead and open that up. Define this policy setting to be enabled. Now, here's the way this works. Basically, when an application tries to install itself, Vista is going to wake up and say, hey, you know what? That's something that requires an elevated set of credentials, administrative credentials or power user or something of that nature. Now, this is kind of one of those judgment call kinds of things. Initially, this seems like a really good idea, but you might want to disable it if you ever think about actually using a feature called Group Policy Software Install. There's actually a policy setting in here. We're going to look at this in a different video. If you're going to use this particular feature, you may want to even just disable this policy altogether. However, you may not. It depends on your network policies overall. It depends on if you're going to be using System Center. There's all kinds of reasons to do it. I'm going to go ahead and enable it for the time being. I can always turn it off, right? So let's go ahead and let's enable this guy. Now, the rest of the user account control stuff, I think there's probably one more we should probably look at. Behavior of the elevation prompt for standard users. Let's open up this one. If a standard user does something that we want to ensure either that particular request is elevated or denied altogether. For example, we could automatically deny anyone from doing anything that requires administrative credentials. I don't think that's necessarily the best idea. Let's say that they have to do something like install a piece of software that's directly related to what they're working on. Now, if we select prompt for credentials instead of automatically deny any elevation requests, prompting for credentials is going to allow either you as the super coach administrator or Jamie as the IT guy to come along and put in administrative credentials. Or let's say you have a help desk, and let's say that you have a procedure in place to create temporary administrative credentials that you can give to a user over the phone. In that instance, then the user could actually put in the credentials themselves, install a software, and then be done. And those temporary credentials would expire in, say, 5 or 10 minutes or so. So we're going to go ahead and leave on prompt for credentials. We'll tell it OK. All right, so those are 3 settings that I wanted to call your attention to. I think you might find them useful. Let's go ahead and let's move on to our last item. And this is one that is going to cause you to kind of scratch your head a little bit. At least I hope it does too. Now, we just applied some local policy settings, right? Yes, we did. Now then, here's the thing. What we're about to do is I'm going to show you a section that is going to prevent any local group policy from running. Okay? Let's go ahead and let's change the filter here real quick. Change the filter options. This is one of those things I just want to call your attention to. Even if you don't use it, it's good to know that it's hanging out there in the background, especially if you're walking into an environment in which you're not setting up everything clean. You know, let's say you're walking into a mixed environment where you've got some Windows XP machines, some Windows 2000 machines, you've got all kinds of stuff. You don't know what's been done in the past. You don't know what kind of policy settings. They might have gone in and just totally did all kinds of weird things with local group policy settings. Well, if that's the case, and I'm telling you this because, well, it's happened to me, turn off local group. I think that should do it for the filter. I'm going to go ahead and filter out here for this one. Yeah, it looks like my filter didn't work very well here. Let's go ahead and let's try this one again. Turn off local group. There it is. All right, turn off local group policy objects processing. Let's go ahead and select this guy. Now what this is going to do, this is going to ensure that any local group policy objects will not be applied. Okay? So if anyone gets in and starts tweaking around with the local group policy objects, that might conflict with what you're setting at the domain level. So I could go ahead and I could enable this guy, and oh, you know what? It says at least Windows Vista. So the Windows 2000 and all that stuff isn't going to make any difference, right? So I'm going to go ahead and turn this guy on and enable it. And this is going to turn off any local group policy stuff that might be running on the physical machine. Now, this may or may not be a good idea. Now, what we're doing in our network with Globomantics, we're doing everything from a clean, fresh install. That does make a lot of things really easy for us and really easy on us. But that's not always going to be the case. Okay, so you might walk into an issue where you might have somebody who went in, tweaked some local group policy stuff, and now it's causing all kinds of havoc. Well, we could turn off all of those local group policy objects from even running and even applying. So this may or may not be a good idea. Now, as I stop and I think about it, I've shown you where it is. I'm going to go ahead and not configure this one because you know what? When we went in here to the Windows settings and went to security settings and local policies, yeah, local policies. Okay, got it. That's going to cause a problem. So let's just go ahead and skip that problem altogether and leave it not configured. But I wanted to tell you about it just in case you find yourself in a weird situation. Because remember, group policy works like this. It goes LSDOU, right? Local, site, domain, organizational unit. And remember, if you enforce a policy, an enforced policy overrides everything else. And if you use loopback processing like we just did, loopback processing always wins. in terms of user settings, even though a user account is not in the same organizational unit as what that group policy object has been linked to. Whew, that was a mouthful, wasn't it? Okay, so we have all of our group policy settings applied and set up. So let's go ahead and let's close out of this, even though we decided not to apply that last one. Again, just want to show you where it was. All right, so what we need to do next is, we're busy playing here in the server manager. We can go ahead and shrink up our group policy management console. Let's go to the command line, and here on the command line, let's do a gp update /force. Now what we're doing is we're taking all of our settings for our new group policy objects, we're pushing them down to any and all machines that require them. Now while we're waiting for this guy to finish up, I want to talk to you just a second about group policy intervals. Now even if you don't do gp update /force, group policy actually updates every 90 minutes to 2 hours, depending upon what you set it at. So you could do nothing and you could just wait like 90 minutes and this particular group policy object would push down and filter out to all your machines. You wouldn't have to do anything. And that's up to you. I mean, there's always that option. If you want your policy to apply now and you don't want it to wait, you can go ahead and use gp update /force. Now, here's the thing though. Hey, if you do this, the policies may not update and may not take effect on the machine until the user either logs off or restarts the machine. Okay, so you can either wait or you can run gp update /force. What do I prefer to do? Can you guess? Yeah, I prefer to run gp update /force. Push it down there and make sure it's done, so that way whenever the user logs off and logs back on or restarts the machine, everything is copacetic again. So now that we've applied all of this stuff, let's go ahead and let's take a shot at doing some practice with this. I'm going to go ahead and bounce on over to client 2. Now I know we set up that initial shortcut to the remote desktop, but I want to go here. I want to go ahead and log on to this machine using SuperCoach. Because remember the sidebar, it didn't work when we were initially opening up the remote desktop thing, even though it worked when I logged on last time. So let's go ahead and let's try this here. All right, so I'm logged on and I'm waiting here. Oh, there's the Welcome Center, and let's see. Oh, there's a sidebar. Okay. So it looks like something didn't work quite right. So tell you what, let's go ahead and let's restart this machine, and we're going to try this one more time after this machine restarts, and we're going to see if in fact our policy did work. And if it didn't, then we might have to go back and revisit our policy settings and such and see if there's anything wrong with it. Everything should work a-okay after we do a quick reboot. Now remember, on that gp update command, there is a gp update /force, and there's also a /boot option. We can actually reboot the machines from afar. Obviously, it's not something we want to do during the middle of the day when everyone is actually doing real work. But it might be something we might want to do after everyone has gone home. All right, so let's try this again here. Okay, log in here as SuperCoach after the restart, and let's see what we got now. Our sidebar should not pop up, and the Welcome Center should also be gone. All right, well, we got one. The sidebar didn't show up, but our Welcome Center is still there. Tell you what, let's go ahead and let's try to log off and log on as another user, and let's see what's going on. Let's try El Binga, or maybe Jay Owens. So let's go ahead and let's switch the user here, other user, and we'll try Jay Owens, because that is the super administrator account. So we'll try something else here, and let's see if it works on the Jay Owens account. Now remember, Jay Owens is not part of standard computers, so we should not see the Welcome Center or the sidebar. And let's see, how do we do? Oh, no sidebar and no Welcome Center. All right, neat. All right, let's try one more. Okay, let's go to log off, and let's try Hank Richardson. Okay. Now we know that Hank Richardson's account has been pretty much exempted from any and all policies to begin with. However, remember, this particular policy doesn't apply to Hank Richardson's account. This policy applies to this computer. So let's try here. Hank Richardson, password. And let's see here. Hank has no sidebar and no welcome center. Okay, neat. We got to try one more. We got to try El Binga. Okay? Because I know that El Binga's account was still popping up those welcome center and sidebars earlier. So let's go ahead and let's try it. El Binga. Because remember, we have other user settings applied to El Binga's account, like this wonderful desktop wallpaper that yours truly built. And let's see, do we have the welcome center? Nope. Do we have the sidebar? Nope. So, I mean, really, we've done a pretty decent job of locking stuff down here at this point. So I'm going to call this group policy experiment a success. Now, let's go ahead and let's log off of this particular account. And now, let's move back on over to the slides. Now, let's talk about group policy preferences, and let's get into that whole network mapping drive thing. All right, so we have done group policy work on the user side. We've done group policy work on the computer side. We've kind of meshed the two with that whole loopback processing thing. Now, let's talk about something new. And when I mean new, I mean brand new. This is group policy preferences, and you've seen these already. Okay, there are group policy preferences for the computer side and for the user side, and it allows us to do a lot of really useful tasks that we used to have to write scripts for all the time. Now, not every administrator is that fantastic at writing scripts. So Microsoft has set up these things like the ability to create folders and add files to machines, being able to specify folder options, and also being able to work with local users and groups on the local machine. There's all kinds of really cool stuff. Like I said, they are available for the computer side as well as the user side too. Now, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but not a lot. Most of the stuff happens on one side or the other. The nice thing about these is that they're really not hard to use. You know, you just got to stop and look at the screen for just a little bit. You'll be able to figure them out. Now, what we're going to be doing with these preferences is we're going to be using mapped drives. What we want to do is we want to create a shortcut for our users so we have an easy way for them to get to the shared folders we created. Remember how we did that whole mapping drives for Hank a little while back? Well, I don't want to walk around to 25 different machines and map drives for all of those machines. I want to be able to push down shortcuts to every single one of them. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a new GPO just for creating these mapped drive links on everyone's machines. Very quick, very easy. We're going to be linking this mapped drives new GPO, new group policy object, to the NY users folder. Now here's another advantage to us setting up the folders the way that we did. We can use inheritance to allow this mapped drives set of settings, and specifically the preferences that we're about to set up. We can have those settings pushed down to the sales users, ops users, and executives accounts, even though they're in separate folders, as long as we don't block any inheritance. Now, we are going to be applying that enforced setting just in case someone decides to block inheritance somewhere else down the line. Let's say Jamie starts feeling his Wheaties one day and starts blocking inheritance to stuff and sees what he can do. Well, we want to make sure that our users will always have access to mapped drives. Now, when you're giving access to something, it's a good idea to enforce a group policy like that. When you're taking away access, that may not necessarily be the best policy to enforce. You're going to have to evaluate it and make a judgment call on a case-by-case basis whether or not you want to enforce a group policy. Now, since the group policy we're going to create, all it's going to do is create mapped drive links. This is a good idea to enforce that policy. We want to make sure that everybody always gets those mapped drives. But let's say that we're taking away something. Let's say that we are removing access to the control panel. We enforce that. Well, that's not necessarily the best thing to enforce, okay? Because when you're restricting something, there's always going to be that one instance, say, that somebody's going to need that control panel to do something or another. So when you're restricting, don't necessarily enforce, but when you're giving access to something, in this instance, shortcuts to mapped drives, that's a good idea. Okay, so let's go ahead and bounce on over to Client 1, and through the magic of remote desktop, let's make this happen. All right, well, here we are back on Client 1, and let's go back here to the Server Manager. We're going to go back to Group Policy Management, and we're going to go into the Domains and Global Semantics. Let's go here to the New York OU, and we want to create a new GPO for all the NY users. So I'm going to right-click, create a new GPO, and link it. And we're going to call this one Mapped Drives. Now I want you to keep in mind that when using group policy to distribute mapped drives, nothing new, but we used to have to do logon scripts and a little funny dance here and there to make it happen. But with these preferences that we're about to set up here under mapped drives, we won't have to do that. Let's go ahead and let's edit this guy. Now we're going to be applying these mapped drives to the user side. And why are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we don't have the mapped drives option here underneath the computer side. But what we want to do, and what we want to happen here is we want the drive maps to follow the user. Okay? Remember, user configuration, the user side of group policy follows the user no matter where they log in. Unless, of course, loopback processing is enabled and we have the replace option. So we're going to not worry about that because our loopback processing for all of our machines are all merge, right? So we don't have to worry about anything being removed or in terms of permissions. All right, so let's go here to drive maps. Okay. Now again, I told you that this preferences stuff, it's really easy to set up. You go to the section that you want to create a preference for. You right-click over here in this white box. You go to New, and you select whatever it is. Okay? So we're going to be creating a new mapped drive. And this new drive properties pops up. Now, when we initially create it, we have to select Create from Action. We have Create, Replace, Update, and Delete. Now, I don't think I really need to explain these options to you, right? Let's say that you needed to replace a drive map, and you switched it to a different drive letter or whatever. Well, you'd replace something else, right? Same thing with delete and update. Let's create. Now we need to specify the location of our drive. Now let's do // nymem1-2k8 / and let's see, what was our folder? What were our folders called? Let's start off with the ops. Managers. Do we want to label it as anything? No, not really. Drive letter. How do we want to handle drive letters? Do we want to pick one, or do we want to use first available? I like first available. And you can decide whichever you want to do. We can use, and remember how I think we were mapping it as O, I think, for ops. Does it really matter which one you use? Not really. As long as you're creating the ability for the user to get to that shared folder, that's really all that counts. So I'm going to stick with first available. That should be A-OK. And I'm going to show this drive. And technically I want to show all drives. All right, so we'll tell that OK. All right, now we need to really rinse and repeat for each one of our drives that we want to showcase. So we're going to do NY mem1-2k8, and then first available, we'll use that one. Show this drive. Whoops, I about forgotten something, didn't I? Let's see, we need to you do general ops. That's what we need. So we'll do general ops, and we'll tell it OK. Whoops, please select a drive letter. All right, let's go ahead and let's use G for general ops. Works for me. Okay. Oops, looks like that one's set to replace. We need to fix that. And we need to set to create. All right, there we go. All right, let's do another one. Are you catching the drift yet? We select creates. We put in the address to it, also known as the UNC if you're a tech head. And let's do sales managers this time. Be first available here. And we will show this drive. We'll show all drives and tell it OK. Oops, select the drive letter. OK, got to do that. Let's use it. And we'll do S. And we'll tell it OK. One more. Let's do new map drive. We're going to create it. We're going to do / NY mem1 2K8 / sales. Let's see, what's the other one? Sales docs. And let's see, let's do that one D. We'll show this drive, show all drives, and tell it OK. All right, so we have created drive maps, and we want these to be pushed out to all of the users. So that way, no matter what machine a user logs into, they can always get access to these mapped drives or these shared folders. So we have applied and created this group policy preference. And just so you know, there's a lot of other really cool stuff that they can do here too. We can put files on every single machine. You know, it's really easy to do. We can create a new file. We can specify a source file, whatever it happens to be, and then I can decide where it's going to go live at. You know, and I could say, okay, well, this guy is going to go live on the C drive. You know, on every single machine. You know. I can create specific folders, registry entries, shortcuts onto the desktop. You know, there's just a massive amount of stuff that we can do here. So part of your homework for this particular video is I want you to play with these in a test environment. Don't play with these in an enterprise production level environment. But there's some really great stuff here that we used to have to do with scripts, and we don't have to use scripts so much now that we have these preference items. All right, so let's go back here to drive maps. This guy is all set up. Let's go ahead and let's close this particular group policy management editor. We're going to enforce mapped drives. So I'm going to right click here on mapped drives and select enforced. Now what this is going to do is it's going to ensure that executives, ops, and sales, all three of these organizational units, every single user inside of those three will have this particular group policy applied. Now, mapped drives, all it does is just map drives for them. You know, I mean, there's nothing that it restricts. But since it's enforced, let's say that I go to executives and I did a whole block inheritance. Well, you know what? Even though executives is trying to block inheritance, since mapped drives is enforced, executive still gets the settings from mapped drives. It doesn't get desktop lockdown, however, but it does get mapped drives. So if I click here on the executive section and I take a look in group policy inheritance, even though I'm blocking inheritance, I still get the mapped drives because mapped drives is enforced. Remember, in the last video, we were talking about that block inheritances, or maybe it was 2 videos ago, I don't quite remember. Block inheritance does not get affected or does not stop an enforced policy. Okay? So if you want a policy to always win, despite block inheritance, enforce it. But we don't want to use block inheritance or enforce very often. Okay? These are things you want to use sparingly. And you're only going to want to enforce stuff that you really, really, really want to happen across the network, like mapping drives. You know, that's a good idea. Okay, so you know what we're going to do now? We have to go back here and let's do a GP update / force. I just hit the up arrow on my keyboard and hitting the enter key. That's going to push down this new policy object out to all of the machines. And so as soon as that guy gets done here, we're going to bounce on over to, you know what, we don't have to bounce on over. What am I talking about? Let's just use our shortcut that we set up here on the desktop for client 2. So I'm going to open up here to Client 2, and let's see here, Binga. We'll just go ahead and we'll use Binga's account here real quick. And let's see if Binga actually has, if I can put in the right password, has those new drives mapped. Now, if Binga does not, there might be an issue that we have to tackle. Because here's the thing, since group policy preferences is new, that also requires a new thing called group policy client-side extensions. Let's go to the Start menu. Let's go to Computer. And let's see, do you see any drive maps? Yeah, I don't see any either. Okay, so that's good. So, I'm not crazy, you're not crazy. In order for Binga, or quite honestly, anybody else to be able to see these new drive maps, we have to install group policy client-side extensions to each and every machine. Now, here's the thing. Let's go ahead and let's close this one out. We're going to go to Windows Update. Let's see if we can get into Windows Update. And in here in Windows Update, you see we have one optional update. Let's view this available update. And oh, would you look at that? Group Policy Preference Client-Side Extensions for Windows Vista. Okay, let's go ahead and let's put a check mark in it, and let's see if we can get it to install. Oh, gee, look at this. It's user account control. We never expected that. Yep, you'll notice here that we're on the secure desktop. Okay, you don't see anything behind it. You're looking at secure desktop through remote desktop, right? Okay, so what we need to do is we need to supply credentials that will actually allow us to install that password. See how everything comes together at the end? Holy cow. Tell you what, your instructor's a pretty smart guy. Okay, so Super Coach, I don't think I put in the right password there. Let's try this again. There's so much from the smart side, huh? Let's tell it okay. All right, there we go. So we need to install this client-side extensions for any of our preferences to work. Now, this is underneath Windows Update. So at some point in time, you're going to have to get your machines updated with this little set of extensions before the client-side preferences are going to work. Okay? Now, there's a lot of different ways to do that. The easiest way, though, is to run Windows Update on all your machines. Now, if your client machines, if your Vista machines are set up for automatic updating, which isn't that bad of an idea, then you may not have to install that optional update. Now, did I kind of plan and plot this a little bit? Yes, I did. I mean, I wouldn't be a good instructor if I didn't, right? But you may not have to. Okay, this particular set of extensions may already be installed if you have Windows Update set up to automatically install updates on all of your client Vista machines. Okay, so our update has been successful. Let's go ahead and close this. Let's go to now our computer, and let's see. Oh, looks like we didn't quite get it just yet. Let's try one more trick. Let's do a quick CMD, and let's do GP update /force. Now again, I'm running this under Lance Binga's account, and Lance can run GP update /force a-okay. I don't have to be logged in as Supercoach in order to make this happen. But we just want to make sure that this is set up. Okay, let's take a look here. Certain user policies are enabled that can only run during logon. Is it okay to log off? Why, yes. Yes, it is. Tell this okay, and that's going to log off Binga. Now, we're going to have to log back in as Binga because here's the deal. Your client-side preferences only happen during logon. Okay, or at least some of them anyway. There's a couple of them that are kind of in between. But anyway, let's go back to CL2 and let's log in here as Lance Binga. And now let's see if we can get those drive maps that we set up so carefully in our group policy preferences section to appear before our very eyes magically. Alright, so here we are back to CL2 underneath Lance Binga. Let's go to computer. And hey, alright. Okay, well, we were successful in getting all 4 of our drives mapped here, A-OK. So we're going to call this one a success. So let's go ahead and let's go back over to the slides and let's do some wrap up and let's move on to the next one. All right, so here's what we have been working on. Holy cow. We have built quite the network and quite the Active Directory structure in a pretty short amount of time. Tell you what, let's go ahead and let me make this a little easier to look at, okay? So we can focus at least a little bit on what we have done in just this video. I know I'm going to need to get my network diagram cleaned up really fast, right? We created a new mapped drive GPO here, and we of course linked it to our NY users so that it would actually apply to all of our GPOs, so that way everybody can have access to those mapped drives. Now we also created a new computer lockdown group policy object, and we linked it to standard computers. We split our machines up into two groups, privileged computers, which only 3 of them are going to eventually go live in. Oh, and you know what? I did forget to put CL2 back over into privileged computers, didn't I? That's okay. We'll leave it there for testing because we might need to test some more stuff later on. Standard computers, it's in its own GPO, or I'm sorry, it's in its own organizational unit. And computer lockdown is attached to or linked to standard computers. Now we learned a lot of kind of really interesting stuff in this particular video. We got some new big words here that we need to remember. Enforce. Remember that enforcing is a setting on a group policy link. Remember that link is its own separate Active Directory object, and it breaks through blocking inheritance. But it also overrides any conflicting policies. Okay, so if you enforce a policy, if there's any conflicting policies, conflicting settings, enforced policies always win. Loopback processing, another one of those things that always wins, which basically it's a group policy setting that forces the application of a group policy object, specifically the user settings, regardless of who is logged into a computer. Remember that the loopback processing either merges, or really what we really should say is it adds to, or it replaces any user side group policy settings that might be attached to a particular user. Group policy preferences. We took a look at this. Settings in a group policy object that expand a group policy's ability to map drives for users, place files, create folders. You know, there's all kinds of really cool stuff that group policy preferences involves with. Now, you need to remember, though, that if you're going to be playing with group policy preferences, you have to have that group policy extensions installed on your Vista machine. And by the way, if you have Windows 2000 or XP machines in your network, there are clients for XP machines. I have to go back and check. I'm not sure there's one for 2000, but I know there are some for XP. All right, so map drives. A map drive, remember, is just a shortcut to a shared folder or a shared hard drive on the network that shows up in my computer. It's just an easy way for people to get to shared folders. So, after viewing this video, you should be able to create new organizational units and move the appropriate computer accounts into them. You should be able to create and link a GPO to an OU. Yeah, we've already done that. Check. And also, you should be able to use the computer side of group policy to do the stuff that we did. Turn off the Vista sidebar and the welcome screen. Set up the loopback processing. Ensure that user account control is enabled on Vista. Ensure that local computer policies do not run on Vista machines in your network. Now again, this one's kind of controversial, isn't it? We're not sure we really want to do this one. So this may or may not be a good idea for your particular network. But if it is, you know how to do it, right? Now you should also be able to use group policy preferences on the user side of a group policy object to do the whole mapping drives, setting up those shortcuts to shared folders for all of your users. And you should also be able to enforce a group policy to ensure that it is applied even if block inheritance is applied to an organizational unit. And I showed you how to enforce. I showed you how to block inheritance. I showed you that if you enforce it, block inheritance doesn't matter, does it? And there's one more thing that I should have probably put on this list, but you should also be able to install the group policy client-side extensions on Vista using Windows Update. Now, by the way, that client-side extensions is an update available as a download from Microsoft.com as a .msu package. It's a self-running executable file that you could download and just put on a USB stick and walk around to all of your machines and install. that pretty much wraps us up for this particular video set. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to install software using group policy objects. So I will see you then.